Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. "4 a.m. is the most difficult part of my day, and it's not for the reason that you might be thinking. It's not difficult because it's so early in the morning. For me, it's quite the opposite. For close to 20 years, I've been rising at 4, sometimes a bit earlier, without the need of an alarm. The sound and feel of 4 a.m. is embedded in my system, and I instinctively know when to wake up, which is where my problem begins. Within seconds of waking up, I am completely awake. I feel as though my brain is like a train that is leaving the station, and I, as the train driver, need to keep up. 5 minutes later, I've walked out, across to the office next door, and I'm already at work. At this time of the day, and without the need of any coffee or tea, I can start to write a book, I can work on a presentation, or I can take on the endless flow of email. So how do I slow down? That was the question I asked myself as we slid into our December break. We're all so alert, so full of this persistent need to work, to learn, to keep going at high speed. How do we slow down without losing momentum? And if we were to slow down, where would we get the time to slow down? This last question seems to cut right to the core, that we have no time to do what is most important to us. Which is why I started first listening to and then reading a book that I'd bought almost 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. It took me 2 years to get to a book, and yet, as December rolled along, I listened to it once and then a second time before getting a physical copy from the library. The name of the book, The Art of Stillness, Adventures in Going Nowhere. A book by writer-traveler Pico Iyer. And let me tell you my short journey about going nowhere in a hurry. We'll look at 3 elements of the book, and it's a very tiny book. It spans just 74 pages. When I listened to it on audio, I was done with listening to it in a few hours. Even so, less is more. And that's the agenda of the book and the lesson that I learned. Here are the 3 things that we'll cover. The first part is the passage to nowhere. The second is the charting of stillness. And the third, the Internet Sabbath. Let's start with the first part, which is the passage to nowhere. Sitting still is a way of falling in love with the world and everything around it. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? And within 3 pages of the passage to nowhere, author Pico Iyer makes you want to slow down, but not just feel like you're getting off the motorway, but instead coming to a complete standstill. A stillness so unusual that if you close your eyes, you can hear the computer gurgle. You can feel the caress of the breeze. Even your heartbeat seems to be so much louder. Iyer, despite the Indian-sounding name, was born in Oxford, in England in 1957, and by the time he's 29, he's got an office on the 25th floor in Midtown Manhattan, an apartment on Park Avenue and 20th Street, and a job that most writers only dream about. He covers apartheid in South Africa, the People's Power Revolution in the Philippines, the chaos that enveloped India during Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's assassination. He wrote extensively for Time magazine. He took long vacations in exotic parts of the globe. The very thought of going nowhere was an incredibly alien concept. And yet the constant excitement has a finite boundary. If you listen closely enough to life, it speaks to you in a whisper. Pico Iyer found that he couldn't hear that whisper. He was racing about so quickly that he never got a chance to see where he was going or truly enjoy what he was doing. He never had a chance to check if he was truly happy. Writers have a very funny way of going to their core. Some of them hit the bottle and others write endlessly. And Iyer decides to retreat to Kyoto in Japan. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Kyoto, but it's one of the most amazing cities in the world. There is a richness in the palaces and temples of Kyoto that's very hard to imagine, let alone replicate. Iyer decided to leave behind his dream life and to spend a year in a small single room on the back streets of Kyoto. He craved a sense of stillness. In the early part of his book, he talks about how not so long ago, our greatest luxury was access to information. There was no such thing as too many books because a book was savored. Information was this slow drug. Today, it's the freedom from information that we seek. The chance to be still is what Iyer calls the ultimate prize. And this is what he says. I'm not a member of any church, and I don't subscribe to any creed. I've never been a member of any meditation or yoga group. And by the time I had hit this paragraph, that's me reading this, it struck me that I was in a remarkably similar position. And we all are, in fact. We're all rushing around madly, slightly overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed at the amount of information we have to process, the things we have to implement. We're not necessarily a member of any meditation or yoga group, and yet there is this obvious desire to slow down. Until Pico Iyer takes it one step lower. We need to be still. We need to go nowhere. The chapter on the passage to nowhere clarifies the issue. It's not about sitting at home and never going anywhere. Traveling opens up our minds, often makes us better. It makes us more interesting people. Stillness isn't about a location. You can sit in the middle of a Mumbai street, cars honking, and yet be perfectly at peace. Though, admittedly, the goal isn't about how far you travel, but how alive you are. Stillness, it seems, is the ultimate adventure. One that I'd been on, but certainly not on a daily basis. So, as we slid into summer in this part of the world, I took my chance. In December, Auckland goes to sleep. Around the 20th of December, all the Christmas parties are done, the kisses are exchanged, and the city goes into hibernation. And it's not just Auckland. The entire country goes into an enforced vacation until mid or even late January. Now, this was my chance to go on a trip that I'd never been on before. I started to meditate. I tried to sit in a lotus position on the floor. And I can do that quite easily because I sit on the floor most days at some point or the other. But I didn't feel comfortable sitting for long periods of time. My next try was to sleep on the floor. And despite the warmth of the season, remember, it's summer in December here, I still was feeling a bit chilly. So I climbed into bed, I pulled the duvet over, and that was my Goldilocks moment. I found what was just right for me. But I discovered that all trips require a bit of planning. So I scoured iTunes for suitable meditation music until I found one that suited me best. I wanted to see what this trip to nowhere was all about. Stillness, like anything in life, requires momentum. When I first tried to clear my mind, the momentum of the day cluttered it with thoughts of an even higher frequency. I might be sitting and doing nothing and have no perceptible thought in my head, and the moment I meditate, the thoughts, random thoughts, burst through trying to shout over one another in an attempt to get my attention. But then the momentum dies down around the 30-minute mark. By the 45-minute mark, it becomes addictive, this meditation stuff. And that's what takes us to the second part of this review, the charting of stillness. In this section, Iyer talks about his friend and songwriter, the late Leonard Cohen. He talks about Matthieu Ricard, a Frenchman who was called the happiest man in the world. So what made this Frenchman so euphoric? Let's find out in the second part. When you look at Matthieu Ricard, you don't see a molecular biologist, because even if you and I don't have a clue what a molecular biologist should look like, Matthieu Ricard doesn't look the part. Now that's because he's wearing the robes of a monk, and he has this very endearing smile. The University of Wisconsin was deeply interested in that smile, so they attached 256 electrodes to the skulls of hundreds of volunteers and put them through a 3.5-hour continuous functional MRI scan. Now, the researchers were searching for positive emotions at first. In later experiments, they looked at areas of compassion, the ability to control emotional responses, and interestingly, the ability to process information. The subjects were similar in most respects, except some had engaged in ongoing stillness, while others had not. There was a marked difference between those who had practiced the art of stillness versus those who hadn't. Those who had gone through stillness for over 10,000 hours had achieved a sense of happiness that was beyond any records. In neurological records, their happiness factor was literally off the charts. And Matthieu Ricard explains happiness in a funny way. He says that happiness is a muscle, that like a muscle it can be developed. His philosophy is based on how Buddhists explain the nature of the mind. Now, you don't have to be a Buddhist to understand the concepts of the blue sky. The concept is very simple. If there are clouds, there is blue sky behind them. All you need to be is patient to sit still, and then the blue sky shows up again. The blue sky analogy was interesting. Now, don't get me wrong. A blue sky, at least to me, is the most boring kind of sky. I love clouds. I love all kinds of clouds. My niece Marcia and I were even members of the Cloud Appreciation Society. So the analogy kind of bugs me because I think that all clouds, without exception, are incredibly stunning. Even so, the analogy of the blue sky is pretty solid. My wife Renuka and I, we lead a life based on our own terms. We travel places that we want to go. Even our websites aren't built with some keywords in mind or driven by clients' demands. We do the things that most interest us instead of being governed by what the competition does. Still, there are clouds of irritation, of envy. They roll in quietly, going from a nice, fluffy cumulus to a menacing cumulonimbus. Theoretically, I want them to put those 256 electrodes on my head, and I want them to find happiness. I want them to find compassion. I don't want them to find me reacting to emotional triggers. I want to be able to process information in an unusual way. And this was the journey that I was willing to take. As I meditated under that duvet, I would start my day off all busy in my brain, and then I'd get on this road to stillness. There are days when I don't even feel like leaving the room and heading to work. It's that addictive. It's that cool. And yet there's the obvious objection, isn't there? Who has the time to stand still or lie still? To me, those 30 to 45 minutes was an intrusion. While on vacation, it's fine because I truly do nothing. But now we're back to work, and that's a chunky 45 minutes out of my day. There's so much to do. How are we supposed to take yet another slice of the day and put it for another activity? So this takes us to the third part, which is the secular Sabbath, as it's called in the book, but which I've changed a bit to call the Internet Sabbath. What happens if you don't check your emails one day? I'll tell you what happens. The elves come in, they check your emails, and then your inbox is clear. But that's not how things work, right? We know the price of not being on top of things. Pico Iyer takes time to talk about the Sabbath, but he stresses that he's not stepping into any religion. Instead, he's talking about a secular Sabbath, about a day every week when you completely free yourself of work. He even suggests that you get off the internet and you don't get back on all day long. Now, all this talk of meditation, taking time off, it gets some people upset. Iyer talks about the time he was on a live radio show, and the woman calling in was clearly upset. It's all very fine for you, a male travel writer in Santa Barbara, to talk about taking the day off, she said. But what about me? I'm a mother trying to start a small business, and I don't have the luxury of meditating for 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day is clearly an exaggeration on the caller's part, but the point is clear. We don't have time to meditate, and we don't have time to stop checking emails. We don't have time to get off the internet. Yet, it's precisely the people who are most under pressure that need to give themselves a break. Iyer suggests the poor, overburdened mother could ask her husband or her mother or a friend to look after the kids for just 30 minutes a day. That would bring a touch of freshness and delight to share with her kids and with her business. As you hear Iyer's words, it's still very hard to accept that you can just walk away from the day. I struggled with weekends. My 4 a.m. wake-up time doesn't respect weekends, and until late 2015, I'd be at work on Saturday and Sunday. I'm only here for a few hours, I would say, but I would often be there until 9 or 10 a.m. So on the weekends, I was supposedly spending 10 whole hours of work. Whether it was productive work or not is completely debatable, but here's why. One weekend, my niece Kara came over and I was lying on the sofa. About once a month, we have these play dates with the girls, Marsha and Kara, and they come over and they run around like crazy. And she turned to me and she said, "Shawnee is always tired." And that was my moment of clarity. The weekends weren't helping me at all. So I stopped going to work on the weekends. Now, we have courses on psychotactics and they have assignments every day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way to Friday. Now, the Friday in the US is my Saturday. And so for many years, I'd say, I need to check the assignment on the day itself. Instead, I just told clients that if they finish the assignment by my Friday evening, I'd check it. If not, I'd be back on Monday. Now, I expected pushback from clients because I was insisting that they get their work done on the day itself, but I wasn't checking it just because of my Saturday. I expected this pushback, but to my surprise, I got none. This isn't just related to me. Many in Silicon Valley observe an internet Sabbath every week. All devices are turned off from, say, Friday night to Monday. Kevin Kelly is a spokesperson for new technologies and is the founding father of Wired magazine. Kevin takes off on a month-long trip without a computer so as to get rooted in the non-virtual world. I want to remember who I am, he says. Even so, Kevin Kelly's methods seem a bit far-fetched. Instead, you can simply turn off your internet connection for a day. My wife Renuka and I go for a walk every day for an hour, sometimes maybe an hour and a half. We try to get about 10,000 to 15,000 steps a day. On Sundays, however, we don't take the workday walking route. Instead, we find another route, and we take a physical book or a diary in which to write down something or to draw something. And I try to avoid the iPad or any kind of device that'll get me back on the internet. It's a constant challenge, but it's completely invigorating. The simple act of putting the phone off and then turning it on 24 or even 48 hours later doesn't increase your workload by much. However, it does dramatically improve your ability to be more calm and to be more resilient in life. So what's been the result of all of this meditation and calmness? Like Iyer, I stayed away from meditation for all these years. I convinced myself that my mind was blank. Even when we were going for a walk or we were painting, my mind was blank. And it truly was. But conscious meditation is different for me. It almost always brings a rush of thoughts, of things that need to be done right now. And what's the result? Renuka tells me that I'm sleeping better, that my breathing is less shallow. And I find myself calm. Instead of reacting to events, I seem to let them pass like clouds, expecting that blue sky will follow shortly. I've actually become a menace because I'm not letting things affect me the way they used to be. It's almost like you can step aside and see these things happening and you're not there, or you're just an observer. But easily the biggest change has been the morning train. Remember that train that starts in my brain and races out of the station at 4 a.m.? Well, it doesn't do that anymore. I now wake up, I meditate, and then I go to work. In fact, my alarm is the meditation chant. So I used to wake up with the alarm, but now it's different. The alarm wakes me up, so I'm sleeping a lot better. And the meditation chant starts up and wakes me up, and the day is totally different. Incredibly, I have more energy. At 10 o'clock in the night, I'm still fresh and I have more time. So that's the book On the Passage to Nowhere. It's a really neat book. It's very small, very easy to read. I'd suggest you read it. I'd suggest you start meditating. And I'd suggest you go nowhere. The three things that we covered in this episode are the first thing, which is the passage to nowhere, where we discover that we could go anywhere in the world and be nowhere every single day. That meditation is totally different from just painting or just doing nothing, that you're consciously meditating. This charting of stillness will bring you a difference. One of my friends doesn't meditate for 45 minutes. He meditates for just 10 minutes, and he's the IT director, and it's a very stressful job. And we had this chat, and I said, you should do 45 minutes. He goes, I only have 10 minutes. And even the 10 minutes has helped him tremendously. He talks about that out-of-body experience when there is chaos. He says, when I'm going to meetings and I know there's chaos, I can call on the meditation that I did earlier in the day. And you have to experience this. And if you're already meditating, then I know I'm just preaching to the choir, but if you aren't, I suggest you go down this path. And finally, the internet Sabbath. That was the third thing that we covered. And in that, it was just switching off the device. Can you actually take a day off where you don't check email or don't go on Facebook? What I did in December was I got rid of the Facebook app. Now, bear in mind that I'm not saying you should get off Facebook. What I did was just get rid of the app. And what I found was that every time I was slightly bored for 3 seconds, I would try to get on Facebook. But there was no app on my phone. And so I got into the habit of not going on Facebook. And then after 3 or 4 days, I would go and install the app, do whatever I needed to do on Facebook, and then delete the app again. And you might want to try that. Maybe you don't want to take the whole Sabbath off, a whole day off from the internet, but just get rid of the apps that you find yourself most frequently on. And then when you want them, reinstall them. It's frustrating, believe me, but it teaches you a lesson of going nowhere. Let's finish off this episode with a few words from Pico Iyer.
One of the first things you learn when you travel is that nowhere is magical unless you can bring the right eyes to it. You take an angry man to the Himalayas, he just starts complaining about the food. And I found that the best way that I could develop more attentive and more appreciative eyes was, oddly, by going nowhere, just by sitting still. And of course, sitting still is how many of us get what we most crave and need in our accelerated lives, a break. But it was also the only way that I could find to sift through the slideshow of my experience and make sense of the future and the past. And so, to my great surprise, I found that going nowhere was at least as exciting as going to Tibet or to Cuba. And by going nowhere, I mean nothing more intimidating than taking a few minutes out of every day or a few days out of every season, or even, as some people do, a few years out of a life, in order to sit still long enough to find out what moves you most, to recall where your truest happiness lies, and to remember that sometimes making a living and making a life point in opposite directions.
That was Pico Iyer speaking on the TED stage. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's happening in Psychotactics land? Well, we just got back from Queenstown, and we had the landing page workshop, and it was absolutely stunning. It wasn't this big workshop like we normally have, and our big workshops are 35 people, okay? It's not 200 and 300 people. I would never do that. I've never done that, and I would never do that. But in this workshop, 8 people turned up. Well, 8 people signed up, 7 people turned up. They turned up from Australia, some came from New Zealand, some from the US, some from the UK. And it was a very small workshop, but a very intimate boutique kind of workshop, which was very interesting. Now, admittedly, I didn't write a sales page for this workshop. It had just one line. It is how to fix your landing page or something like that. It was just one line. And still these 8 people, 7 people really, made the journey. And we had a really great time. Why was it such a great time? Because the workshop was built around a bit of fun as well, a bit of stillness. So we worked for 2 days, then we took a whole day off, and then we came back on the last day. And what they found was that they were able to write sales pages faster. Like in 3 days, they were able to write a sales page. And to me, that was great, because in the past, I've had these very long 3-month sessions trying to teach people how to write the sales page. And then when they go on to their own website and they have to write their sales page, it's such a daunting task that they never get anything done. And to see that in those 3 days, we included slides and everything, and they sat there and they finished their sales page before they went home. So yes, I said 3 days, but technically you could finish that astounding sales page in probably a day, maybe even half a day. And that's what they found. And sometime later in this year, I will put that program together so that you can do the same, so that you can create your landing page, your sales page to sell your product or your service, and do it incredibly quickly and do it incredibly well, as you would expect. So that's what happened in Queenstown. We also took a break in Gibbston, and I'm a big electric car fiend, but I had to drive a petrol car. That drive from Arrowtown to Gibbston, I did it like 14 times. It was just astounding. I'm a lot into geology these days, and just that whole Northwest Remarkables and East-West, the whole Crown Range is just fascinating. Just all that upliftment off the ground from below the earth is just amazing. So yeah, if you have some geology links, feel free to send it to me. If you're interested in 5000 BC, well, you should be, because it's a really good place to be. Lots of introverts, good questions, and I write a lot of content there that is relevant to you. So people ask a question, and then I write a bunch of articles that answer your question and possibly even turn it into a report. So I think you'll find 5000 BC very cool. I think you should join us at 5000bc.com. It's 5:52 a.m. here in Auckland. It's almost time for my walk. I'll speak to you on the next podcast. Bye for now.